Hello and welcome to today's webinar. The topic is identifying, evaluating, and justifying IT efficiency return. This special webinar event is brought to you in partnership with Nutanix and produced by Actual Tech Media. This is a really cool event. We've got some great content lined up for you today. If you're interested in justification and cost and value when it comes to your IT spend, you're in the right place. Before we jump into it, just a little bit of housekeeping information that you need to be aware of. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. I'll be introducing you to our expert presenters here in just a moment, but before I do, I want to let you know that we want this to be an educational event, and as such, we encourage you to use the questions box. It's there on the left-hand side of your audience console. We appreciate all your, hello and good afternoon messages, of course, but we also want to help you to get your questions answered when it comes to calculating ROI and TCO for your IT spend. These are important topics that I know a lot of companies struggle with out there. So we've got the experts on today's webinar, so let us help you. Bring us your questions, and we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We also have a number of handouts there available for download. There's the link to the Nutanix test drive, which is a very cool, completely free opportunity for you to try out the Nutanix solution for yourself. So make sure that you check that out. There's also a link to the ROI story, which is Mr. Kaplan's book that you'll be learning about in the presentation today. And then finally, a link to the IDC TCO ROI calculation tool. So make sure that you check out those handouts. And then finally, we'll be announcing the winner of the Tango $300 gift card at the end of today's presentation on the live event. If you're not familiar with those Tango gift cards, they can be redeemed for e-gift cards at your choice of online retailers, including Walmart, Best Buy, and many restaurants. So a really valuable prize. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. Before I introduce you to today's expert presenters, I guess I should mention my name is David Davis, and I'll be serving as your moderator for the webinar today. And with that, it's time to get started. I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenters. They are Mr. Steve Kaplan, Vice President of Customer Success for Finance at Nutanix, and Mr. Greg White, Director for Solutions Marketing, also at Nutanix. Steve and Greg, it's really great to have you on the event today. I'll first hand it off to you, Steve. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, David. And thanks to everybody who's listening. Even though we're talking about IT efficiency today, it's important to remember that the purpose of IT is not to cut the cost of IT. And this lofty sounding tip is one of many found throughout the chapters of my latest book that Greg mentioned, that David mentioned. And a funny but absolutely true story. At Nutanix.next 2019 was a physical occurrence in Anaheim, California, took place in early May. And this was just after release of my new book. And it was shortly after I had injured my shoulder snowboarding. So I was in a sling, I was in some pain. And my hotel, where I left my wallet, I had my credit card with me, was quite a walk to the convention center. And upon arriving, they had a sign, must have valid ID. I wasn't at all concerned. I walked up to one of the registration desks. I've worked at Nutanix for over 6 years back then. I'm a speaker at this event. Well, that didn't work. So I asked to speak to a supervisor, and I was getting a bit concerned. I have a credit card. I'm sorry, you must have a government-issued photo ID. Well, dreading the long walk back to my hotel in my sling, I was inspired by one last idea. I reached into my backpack, I pulled out my brand new copy of my new book, flipped it open to a picture of ROI Dude, and I said, that's me. And they let me in. Over the years, I've been very fortunate to work with senior technical architects to write 8 total books on VMware and Citrix technologies. All my co-authors told me that I wrote the easy parts, and that was probably true. But I showed them last year coming out with my first solo book, as David mentioned, The ROI Story, a guide for IT leaders. Mark Templeton, the longtime CEO of Citrix, graciously wrote the foreword. And the book is targeted to IT professionals to help them not just use financial analysis framework to evaluate disruptive technologies, but then how to build a justification around those technologies so they can get the budget and the monies to actually bring them in-house when they make sense. Over a period of 20 years, I started, ran, and ultimately sold 2 channel partner businesses. The first focused on Citrix, the second on VMware. And rather than use conventional sales methodologies, we would use financial analysis, ROI, TCO, to help our customers evaluate disruptive technologies like Citrix, like VMware. I considered Cisco UCS to be disruptive way back in its day. In fact, what you're looking at is a picture from the fall 2012 edition of Cisco's magazine. The cover story, Getting Real with ROI, was about the financial analysis work I did for Concentra Healthcare in Dallas. And that's me in the middle, speaking with Suzanne Kosup, CIO of Concentra. And Susanna told me, Steve, for years I've been trying to get the monies we need to expand our small virtualization environment, but the most I can get is $15,000 to $20,000 at a time, not enough to even make a dent. So I worked with Suzanne's staff to put together a comprehensive ROI analysis that I thought had very good results. But Suzanne told me, we're owned by a private equity company with extremely stringent financial controls. We need more. So when Suzanne and I presented the results to the senior management and a couple of board members, of course we went over the numbers. But what we emphasized was that Concentra was running on a backup generator and that the air conditioning needed almost $1 million overhaul. But even all this, with the hot Dallas summer months approaching and ever increasing demand for servers, there was still no guarantee they wouldn't suffer prolonged downtime, which would have, of course, been devastating to the business. And if Suzanne were here, I think she'd tell you something like, that was an amazing meeting. After years of struggling to get monies and drips and drops, we essentially got verbal approval on the spot for the millions of dollars we needed to virtualize our entire data center. Now, after selling that second business, I moved up to Lake Tahoe, where I envisioned a nice, cushy consulting career. And a friend of mine at VMware VCDX gave me a call and said, hey, Steve, I joined this hot startup. I think you could be a good fit. Come interview. And I just moved up to Tahoe. I wasn't looking to go back to work for anybody, but I interviewed with the CEO and VP of sales. And I was so impressed with them. And when they showed me their technology, I was blown away. And I'm thinking to myself, if this stuff actually worked, this would change the entire industry. But then I thought, how often does a 50-person startup have a prayer against a handful of multi-billion-dollar giants that completely dominate the data center, that dominate the channel partner distribution system, and so on. So I didn't join. What I should have done in retrospect was done a financial analysis, which would have been clear of the value that Nutanix brung. But after the explosive growth after a year, even I realized, these guys were going to do it. I gave up my dreams of a cushy consulting career. I went back to work 70 hours a week at a startup. But, that was over 7.5 years ago now, and it has been an incredible experience to participate, as Nutanix unquestionably has changed the industry. And of course, Nutanix itself is a $1.6 billion company now. In my book, I make the case that the SAN-based data center model, what I call the hardware-defined data center model, that model is broken. And I give a lot of examples about that. My favorite is this tweet from Mustafa Kali, who authored Storage Design and Implementation in vSphere 6. He bragged on Twitter that he fit all 1,242 pages in one book. Now, this is a big, heavy book. When we used to travel, and I'd bring it with me as a prop for speaking engagements, it would take up over a quarter of my suitcase. One time I had a TSA agent search my suitcase because he couldn't believe a book could be that big. Now, in contrast, the Nutanix equivalent to storage design and implementation in vSphere, because half our customers still do run vSphere, is a 22-page tech note. So the 1,220-page delta represents just all this massive complexity of a SAN-based architecture. And of course, where there's complexity, there's a lot of cost associated with it. Probably even worse, there's rigidity, there's inflexibility, there's inability for IT to rapidly deliver the innovative new services and offerings that the business is demanding for its customers. And I believe that that's why we have this big hype to lift and shift everything to public cloud. During my frequent conversations with organizations across the globe, they'll often tell me we have a cloud mandate, or we have they'll even say it proudly, we have a cloud first policy. And as an analyst, I ask why. And sometimes there's silence. Sometimes they'll say, gosh, I don't know. Sometimes they'll say, well, everybody's doing it, or the board told us to do it. Now, sometimes I do hear something like, we want more agility. We want faster time to market. Great reasons to go to cloud, whether on-prem or public, because cloud, after all, is an operating model. It's not a destination. But by far and away, the most common reason I hear for a cloud-first policy is we want to save money. My response, fantastic. We all want to save money. Would you mind sharing your analysis with me? And nobody ever has, because you don't go to public cloud to save money, at least not for predictable workloads, which just so happen make up the majority of workloads for most organizations. Tim McCallum on my team was speaking with the chief cloud officer, we'll call him George, of a cloud-first company. And George was saying, hey, Tim, I get the whole concept that Nutanix brings cloud-like agility and simplicity and scalability to my own data center. Sounds wonderful, but we're just going to stick with our public cloud provider because they're so cheap. And Tim said, well, I'm surprised to hear you say that. We do a lot of analyses, and we find that typically for predictable workloads, that customers can run them for 1/4 to 1/2 the cost of public cloud on-prem on Nutanix. And if you're open to it, I'd like to do an analysis for you using your own numbers. And George said, well, sure. In fact, we recently sent our RV tools output to our public cloud provider for the next 34 workloads we're planning to move there so they can size them. I'll give you the same output so you can cost them on Nutanix, but don't get your hopes up. A few days later, Tim came back with a TCO analysis. This was the summary slide. He said, George, as you can see, 5-year projected cost of running a public cloud, 1.35 million. Same cost for running those 34 workloads on Nutanix, 380,000. So $1 million savings, 73% less expensive. And fast forward 8 weeks, and the real estate company was a Nutanix customer. In addition to the high cost of renting space for predictable workloads in public cloud, the invoices tend to be very variable, hard to predict, and it doesn't really matter how smart you are. Even rocket scientists have problems. This is an article from the Register earlier this year about NASA, who negotiated a $65 million a year contract with AWS, but they failed to account for data egress, for scientists downloading data back off of their website. And so that ended up costing them an extra $30 million a year on top of the $65 million. There are lots of other considerations about public cloud challenges as well. Performance, noisy neighbor, capacity. One of the leading cloud providers has had multiple capacity outages the last several months, especially in EMEA. Complexity, like I mentioned, for invoicing. Security is a huge one. Public cloud is very secure, but yet the attack vector, the attack plane, is very broad, and all the security best practices and policies and methodologies you've built up over the years on-prem don't translate to public cloud. The biggest example of that is probably Capital One, AWS poster child, and yet last year they had a record breach of 100 million records. Fortune magazine estimates it could end up costing them $500 million, and this all stemmed just from misconfigured server. Cloud migration. Forrester did a study where they showed the average cost of the participants to migrate to public cloud is $1 million, and it could take years to get to public cloud if you ever really get there. And until that last workload leaves your data center, you're still paying for both environments, on-prem, the high-cost rent of the public cloud, and for your staff to manage the on-prem environment, and the specialist in public cloud DR and security and redundancy and backup to manage the public cloud. Without Nutanix anyway, public cloud is a lock-in. You get used to using their tools, to writing their APIs, very difficult to switch. And then even mundane issues like accounting changes. As of January of last year, new international accounting standards and domestic standards mean you can no longer capitalize your public cloud contract cost. which then means you have to expense them, so they hit EBITDA, which can negatively impact bonuses, make it difficult to raise money, and so on. With all these types of considerations, challenges of public cloud, you might expect that there must be some organizations bringing applications back out of public cloud on-prem, and you'd be correct. IDC did a big study mid last year of 2,211 enterprises in public cloud, and they found that 85% of them had repatriated one or more applications, and IDC projected that 56% of all lift and shift public applications would come back out over the next 2 years. I wrote an article in Forbes earlier this year talking about the hybrid cloud model, which every leading analyst I've read, they all say it's not only our primary model today for cloud computing, but it's going to be even more so in the future. And how do you determine an optimal hybrid cloud strategy? I recommend using the financial analysis framework as your starting point. In my book, I include a 10-step guide to doing TCO for public cloud and go through all the different nuances and variables and so on. Now, the great thing about hybrid cloud is Nutanix clusters, from my standpoint, of course. We just announced it going GA 2 weeks ago at the .next virtual conference that Nutanix held. And clusters is just so great because it lets you migrate instantly to public cloud without reconfiguring anything. And today it's AWS, but certainly more and more it'll be all the hyperscalers. And you can run your exact same security practices, your exact same IT governance. You can run cost optimization models across both platforms. So it's just phenomenal for developing this optimal hybrid cloud environment. You can use Prism management to manage both environments with the same management pane. But also, you can save money. And that seems really counterintuitive. How can you pay for Nutanix clusters and then pay your public cloud provider and reduce your overall bill? But it's possible for several reasons. One of them being reducing what we call micro waste. When you go to a public cloud provider, you're purchasing certain kind of t-shirt sizes of virtual machines in terms of vCPU and memory, and you also purchase storage increments. And unless your VMs fit exactly within those parameters, you're going to have some excess capacity, excess resources that you're not able to utilize, and you can't share those among other VMs. On just a VM basis, they don't amount to much, but when you have hundreds or thousands of VMs, it can really add up to a lot of money. With Nutanix clusters, we let you hibernate and resume, meaning that when your VMs are not used, they're spun down, the data is ported over to S3. When you use them again, the data comes back. Oversubscription is another type of big benefit, that the public cloud providers tend to have very low ratios of oversubscription, whereas with Nutanix clusters, you can run far greater ratios and in that way get a lot more benefits from public cloud. And there's a lot of other reasons as well. We have a blog post that'll be coming out soon explaining everything in great detail. Based what we call 3-tier environment. And you can see Nutanix clusters is more expensive than Nutanix on-prem, and even in this case, a little bit more expensive than 3-tier. Actually, we think now in many situations it'll be less expensive than 3-tier. And it's far less expensive than the 2 leading public cloud providers, even though, of course, it's running in public cloud. A financial analysis is also great to help mitigate this big status quo bias. We're all human, even IT admins, and it's, someone may be nearing retirement and doesn't really want to upset everything by bringing in a disruptive technology, or somebody else has deep relationships with their vendors he doesn't want to accept, or somebody else has built their career around certifications, doesn't want to see that go to waste. I mean, all understandable personal concerns, but they, of course, influence the ability to do an objective financial analysis. But even in by far the majority of cases, which I think is true, where IT folks are curious about technology. They want to understand it. They want to explore disruptive solutions. Even at their own discomfort, they want to do what's right for the organization. But even then, they're subject to what we call confirmation bias. And this is where they look through the disruptive technology with the lens of status quo. As just an example, imagine we could go back in time 30 years and we see a would-be taxi passenger standing miserable in the rain, fruitlessly trying to hail a taxi. And we go up to her and we say, you know, in 30 years, there's going to be these new technologies, the internet, smartphone, GPS, and ride sharing companies like Uber and Lyft and Grab that will transform your transportation experience into something that's simple and predictable and even pleasant. She would probably lack the context to truly understand what we're talking about. And we see the same type of thing is true with disruptive technology. At Nutanix, one of the big questions we still frequently get is, what is your cost per gigabyte or terabyte? Because that's how we measure storage. And it's a great way to measure storage if you're comparing, let's say, two SANs. But in this modern world of software-defined, hyper-converged compute and storage, that type of metric makes absolutely no sense at all. Another great example of status quo bias is the whole virtualization lifecycle. When I started my VMware consultancy in early 2005, the biggest objection we would get from IT professionals, you will never put my production server into a virtual machine. Now that sounds kind of laughable today, and yet Gartner, who's in the business of predicting trends, that's what Gartner does, 3.5 years ago, March of 2017, they retired their magic quadrant for virtualization because they saw what was happening in the public cloud space. And indeed, every leading public cloud provider and hybrid cloud provider, meaning Nutanix, we all support legacy, commercial, proprietary, standalone hypervisors. But for our own customers, we all provide these integrated Linux-based hypervisors that are far simpler. I mean, there's no separate management tier you have to buy and set up and figure out how to configure for redundancy and for scalability. You know, there's no extensive training required or certifications. Nobody gets certified in AWS virtualization or Alibaba virtualization or Nutanix AHV virtualization. They're just there. They're scalable. They're resilient. So financial analysis helps shed a spotlight on status quo bias, on confirmation bias, and helps an organization, you know, kind of remove itself from these biases so that it can make the best technology decision for its environment. We did a large or an IDC study that was published earlier this year. Greg White is going to talk about that.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Yeah, what I wanted to do was spend a little time and give some more real world data and allow you to get some frameworks of ways that you can think about how to look for cost optimization, how to look for returns on investment that can help you with this financial analysis approach, can help you if you're looking to be more efficient, and just provide some new ways of thinking about that and frameworks, and use this IDC study to talk about that. So we ask IDC to go out and talk to our customers and understand where did they see value when they switched from their previous approach to IT infrastructure. Typically, this was a 3-tier approach. There were a little smattering of some hyper-convergence that was in there already, but had switched to Nutanix. But you'd think of this largely as mostly 3-tier approach comparison as moving from one to the next. And it was from customers around the world. It was from customers of different sizes. You can see here what the average size was. So you get into really a enterprise scale, but there were some smaller ones in there too. Like if you looked at the paper, you'd see the median was lower than this. So there were a couple bigger ones, but the goal was to have a nice sampling of regions and size and industries. And so we gave these customer names to IDC, and they did this really extensive over an hour long interview, or up to an over an hour long interview, where they really dug into a bunch of different areas looking for value. And so what we'll do is talk about that. An interesting thing also is the variety of workloads that were being run on Nutanix at these different customers. And you can see, often people talk about hyperconvergence for Robo or VDI because they're not as new, not as familiar. A lot of things Steve talked about before. And so sometimes they'll be hesitant to put, big production performance heavy workloads on there. But we've been able to demonstrate that all of these run, well on Nutanix when you follow the best practices and you scale for them, and having that pool of resources allows you to really make it easy to continue to add additional workloads as you need. But you can see in here ERP, big data analytics, healthcare apps, business applications, entertainment, medical records. So quite a variety of workloads that were part of the study. And so what were the things, areas that people found value when it came to switching to Nutanix? And so what I've done is kind of break these out into a few different columns. So there was some business value that was created. You can see the return on investment there, the payback. And really a big piece is this lower total cost of operations. And that's what we'll spend some time focusing on, to give you some ideas of ways in which you would be able to think about this in a value analysis if you were looking to make a change. There's operational efficiencies and resiliency. Those factor into that cost of operations. Those factor into return as well, with less unplanned downtime, being more efficient, being faster to do upgrades, doing faster to deployments. And then IT agility and business results. So being able to actually realize more revenue because of your infrastructure than you would have without making that switch. Some other areas that are really interesting to look at too, that you may not think about, are things like, how can I be better at development? Like, what kind of benefits would I find if I could bring apps to market faster, or my developers were more productive? Same thing, like, what if I could make my help desk more productive? If I could make my IT security more efficient? So those are areas where these customers identified value that they were able to realize when they moved to Nutanix. And then there's a whole suite of areas around better data protection and recovery. So being able to recover data faster, that's going to help productivity. Having to reduce your backup windows, so you have less staff time focused on that. It's taking up fewer resources. Being able to do more frequent backups and do recovery efforts, be better at that. And so those are some additional areas to think about. So here's some new buckets, I think, hopefully, that will spark some ideas for you around where you could find cost savings, where you can find better return. And all of this is in this IDC study. It's at nutanix.com/TCO. You'll see the link at the end. And it is also in the handouts as well. There's an online tool that uses this data. And if you look at this paper, it also goes into some more depth in these different areas. So one of the big things to think about is, where are the big buckets of where I'm going to find benefits for my organization? And so what IDC did was break these down into, you'll see here, there is some benefit when it comes to IT infrastructure cost reduction. There's better IT staff productivity. So you're going to see benefits there. You're reducing risk, so your user productivity increases. And all in all, that adds also business productivity benefits. And so what they did was put these into these different buckets. That's how they got to where they got as far as a return on investment, by using these different buckets of value that are created. On the other side, on the TCO side of things, where are the areas where you're lowering costs, you're able to be more efficient? And so they identified similar areas. You can look at IT infrastructure cost savings, There's IT staff time cost savings. And then there's productivity and unplanned downtime cost savings. They're all associated with making that switch, being more efficient, having a lot more automation, able to really lead to this lower cost of operations. You look over time, you're continuing to gather those benefits as you go through. Some interesting kind of data points that came out, and you can see different customer quotes from those, but you can look at here at being faster to deploy. That's going to allow you to be more agile, having your infrastructure be much easier to provide to teams, self-service, things like that. So having that management piece be a lot more efficient and create better productivity for different teams, for data protection, for VDI users, for security. All of those show up when it comes to that efficiency on the management side. And then, like I talked about a little bit before, that idea of being able to provide a more agile infrastructure really can change the game for business units, for developers, for different application owners. So these customers found they could deploy more applications, they could provide more new features, and they could be a lot more productive for their developers by using Nutanix. And then the last area that I was going to highlight is around that business and operational side. So where can you think about how you're adding value to the business? That could be in customer satisfaction. You can see here a quote about one customer feeling that they had really increased their customer satisfaction rating. Being able to serve their customers faster, they felt resulted in higher revenue. So they could quantify what it meant to be able to make that sale faster. Being able to be quicker to cache so that they could stand up their environments more quickly. That's huge for them. And by standing up their environments more quickly. And then being able to, bring on new branches, offices, applications much faster. And so that's going to provide value for them as well. So hopefully this gives you some frameworks and ideas that you can apply to your financial analysis and new areas to think about for that. You can use the online calculator that's in the resources to put this data to use for your unique environment and dive deeper into that analysis as well through the paper to get some more details of some of the things I've talked about. But with that, I think I'm going to pass it back to Steve and kind of go through some more areas where there's great opportunity to realize value by taking this new approach to infrastructure.
Great, thanks, Greg. So with the pandemic and work from home and work from anywhere, 2020, now has to be finally the year of VDI. And I wrote an article in Forbes earlier this year about capitalizing on the ROI of work from anywhere. And one of the great things about the Nutanix hyper-converged infrastructure model is that unlike a SAN, if you're a VDI customer and you're getting ready to deploy say 5,000 users, you have to buy a SAN that's big enough with enough capacity in terms of drive bays and storage controllers to hopefully meet those resource demands 5 years down the road. Because if you buy less, then you're going to have this very expensive forklift upgrade. I mean, you're still going to have that anyway at the end of 5 years, but at least you hope not to have it before then. In contrast with Nutanix, you can start with as few as 3 nodes and then grow 1 node at a time if you want. What's happening is over time, because of Moore's law, the hardware is getting faster. So you're getting more VMs or more users per node as you expand out your footprint. And in the VDI world, what that means is that you can time your deployment to coincide with your refresh rate of laptops and PCs, meaning that what we find doing a lot of analyses is that in most cases, just the refresh cost of those PCs and laptops is enough to pay for the whole VDI deployment for the Citrix or Horizon software, for the Nutanix software, for the servers, for the partner services to set it up. So you get all the benefits and all the value of VDI, and you save money in the process over your physical desktops. And unlike a SAN environment, there's never a forced forklift upgrade. If a customer wants to upgrade her 5-year-old Nutanix nodes, then she can simply do it in minutes with far fewer nodes, no disruption at all. Nutanix, has extended its web scale architecture for the core AOS operating system to include the Prism management, to include virtualization. But we also have a whole lot of other portfolio products that have come online to simplify database administration by automating all these formerly manual tasks. And one of those products is called Nutanix Era, targeted toward database lifecycle management. And DBAs have a challenge today because they face, how can we deliver a more cloud-like experience to the business, but how can we do it affordably and very quickly? And we did a TCO analysis for a customer who purchased Era, and prior to that, they had 3 DBAs, but they lost 2 of them, and they couldn't even find 2 DBAs to replace them with. So the one poor remaining DBA, she spent 87% of her time on low-level DBA tasks that add absolutely zero value to the company. After installing Era, she spent by far the majority of her time on tasks that actually added great value for the organization, and she didn't have to hire any more DBAs. And so we look at things like systems administration opportunity and how we reduce the licensing and support with Era of third-party products, how we decrease the time to market, how Era shrinks the storage requirements for database copies, which then also lowers the corresponding hardware requirements. And in this particular example, total TCO savings were realized of $2.6 million, 62%. My team also does what we call look-back analysis. We go to customers who've been running Nutanix for typically a number of years, and we work with them to quantify, what were your hardware savings, your software savings, your IT staff savings? How did it impact your IT staff quality of life in terms of getting their weekends back and their nights back? What kind of effect did it have on your business? And one of those look-backs that we completed not long ago was for Fairway Independent Mortgage Company. As you can see, the look-back analysis shows that they saved almost over $11 million. And I actually started working with Fairway back in 2014, and they had just purchased a vBlock the year before, which was the first big converged infrastructure offering. But they were much smaller than they are today, but they're so fast growing that they filled up that vBlock in just a year. So they were one of those SAN big casualty hits. And the CIO at the time, he's retired now, but Bob Orcus asked me to do a TCO comparing buying a second vBlock versus buying Nutanix. And he was impressed enough with the $940,000 projected 5-year savings. They took a gamble on what was then a very young and small Nutanix and brought it into their environment. Today, Fairway runs all of their production and DR applications on hundreds of Nutanix nodes. They are now the 5th largest private mortgage company in the country. Loan originations of $40 billion last year, and far ahead of that this year, a massive growth rate. Randy Allen did a session with me at the Virtual.next, and he made the comment that Nutanix has been an integral part of our continuing rapid growth. And in fact, when they got the work from home mandate that several months ago, because of the Nutanix architecture, they were able to move all of their now over 7,000 plus employees to work from home in just 2 weeks. We did one of the Nutanix challenges we faced is that when big enterprises typically bring Nutanix in for a particular use case, a niche case, and what tends to happen is Nutanix works really, really well. So well that in some cases, people kind of forget about it. Maybe they're behind on 50 projects and 30 things are breaking, so they just don't give it much thought. And one of those cases was Seattle Children's Hospital. And the director of IT was questioning, what's the value of Nutanix? So as part of the look back analysis, we quantified their downtime, which was very easy because they quantified their downtime, so we knew exactly what it was. And we showed them that when they brought in Nutanix for their use case, that it reduced their downtime from about 30 million a year down to essentially nothing. And he made the comment, we all love to hear, why aren't we running Nutanix everywhere? And the CIO spoke at our .next virtual conference a couple weeks ago, and he said, we have Citrix on Nutanix serving 4,000 people a day with 5 nines of uptime. One of the important things when doing financial analysis, whether you work for the end user organization or for a manufacturer or for a channel partner or another consultant, it's extremely important to build up credibility. And to thoroughly back the numbers, whatever those numbers are, show the assumptions, and I always encourage my team to be very conservative. We want our customers, when they're standing before the CFO or the board, to be able to say with conviction, these numbers are real, they're conservative, there's no way we don't hit them. Nutanix's award-winning CIO, Wendy Pfeiffer, in a podcast last year said, relax about the technology, focus on the business. I couldn't agree more. And we're not always successful at getting this kind of mind share, but my team, we always strive to understand what are the business objectives, especially 5 years down the road, and then let's map those back to the IT initiatives, and then ultimately back to the disruptive technology. As was the case with Concentra Healthcare, a lot of times even compelling numbers aren't enough to galvanize the IT decision makers to act, especially when it comes to moving away from the comfort of their legacy status quo environments. It's important to set an emotional hook, and what better way to do that than to tell a story, as we did with Concentra, wrap a story around the numbers. And you can reach me at Cap at Nutanix or on Twitter at ROIDude. And we also have links to a lot of resources, including the ROI Story, a Guide for IT Leaders book. And with that, we'd like to go ahead and open it up for questions from the audience.
Excellent presentation, Steve and Greg. Really, really cool stuff that you guys are doing at Nutanix, and congratulations on the release of the new Nutanix cluster solution. We do have some questions here for you from the audience. If you have a question about TCO and ROI calculations, now's the time to get it in because we're starting our Q&A. So let's see. First question I wanted to ask you, Steve, and that is, basically, why did you write the book on ROI? What was the motivation behind that?
I think it was kind of 25 years of experience just bursting to get out. The funny thing was that I actually wrote the first version of the book really quickly because it kind of had all this content in my head that I just spewed out. And it was originally titled Quantifying IT Decision-Making in the Era of Hyper-Convergence and Cloud. I know, really catchy title, right? And as I was hiking the Lake Tahoe trails one night, I kind of had this epiphany. When I was honest with myself, the book read like a great big white paper, and a really boring one at that. And I knew that a good financial analysis tells a story, and I realized the book needed to do the same. So I spent the next 8 months completely rewriting it as the ROI story, got a lot of more input and help from my team, and included a lot of anecdotes and a lot more case stories and ROI dudes. So hopefully making it a lot more interesting to read. I get a lot of good feedback on it, and the point, the primary premise being to help IT folks evaluate disruptive technology and then get the budget, get the approval to bring them in house. Because over my many years of selling or promoting disruptive technology, that's always been a really big problem.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a great book and fun to read, a good story as well. And that's not always real easy to do when it comes to writing a book on ROI. So kudos to you. And for anyone who wants to download the free ebook, you can click on the ROI story link right there on the resources in the slides window. You can also go to the handouts tab. Those links are there as well. Next question is for you, Greg. They said that you showed an average savings in the study What if my company is smaller? Does that change the average savings?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, that is a good point. I didn't mention that. What they did in the study was they used the average for all of those calculations, but you'll also see in the paper they break it down to a per 100 user measurement as well. So you can then take that and apply to your company size. So if your company size is 2,000 users, then you can use that per 100, and figure out a different version. The TCO calculator also would take that into account for you as well, because it asks some questions about employees and VMs and things like that. So it is you're able to use that, kind of scale it based on that per 100 user approach.
Okay, excellent. And I want to remind everyone again that TCO calculator, the link is there on your screen. There's also a link to the IDC TCO ROI online tool in the handouts tab. Next question is for you, Steve. When you go to calculate whether or not someone should migrate to the public cloud, what are some of the key considerations that you use in that analysis?
Well, like I said, the in my book, chapter 8 includes a whole big section on it, and it gets pretty technical and a lot of details and things to look for. But from a broad stroke standpoint, it's really looking at the whole picture. A lot of people say, well, it's only pennies per minute, so it's really cheap. No, you have to figure out, map your workloads to the specific public cloud you're looking at. Include things like connectivity cost, and even staffing costs on both sides. What would decrease, what will increase, what types of extra IT governance you have to put in place, how you manage it all, what happens if you have to bring workloads back on-prem or data egress. So, like I said, for details, please go ahead and get a copy of the book. But on a broad stroke, it's really doing the analysis. I'm just amazed in all my years in IT. I've never seen anything like this. Even when virtualization came out, there was a virtualization first mantra, and virtualization was even having to buy a big old, clunky, expensive SAN that was never built for virtualization to start with. Even with that, and the storage network and everything, and the administrator, even with all that, virtualization was still a no-brainer. Virtualization, from an economic standpoint, virtualization first inevitably made sense. I don't know any point in time that it didn't make sense. That is absolutely not the case with public cloud. We have I have one customer who was projecting a $2,000 to $3,000 public cloud bill a month. They ended up averaging $40,000 a month. One time they got a $300,000 bill a month. And you just see these types of horror stories still out there all the time. So it's doing the analysis. Now that Nutanix Clusters is out in GA, I would also, of course, this isn't in the book because it just came out. And honestly, we just kind of discovered not too long ago ourselves that just how much money customers can save running clusters in public cloud. So I would also recommend factoring that into your analysis. And you can use Test Drive, you can set it up, you can see it. With clusters, you can also, of course, easily set up a hybrid cloud environment, moving applications back and forth. So now you can really start optimizing your economics of which workload should go where, which public cloud, ultimately, as we support more and more of the hyperscalers, and have an environment that's not only going to work optimally for your organization in terms of time to market and efficiency and speed, but also will save you the most money.
Very interesting. And there's a question here about, this company, they're facing budget cuts, and can doing a financial analysis help if a company is already facing budget cuts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to the slide I showed in the beginning of ROI view, that the purpose of IT is not to cut the cost of IT. Taking it to its logical extreme, you would get rid of all your computers and just give people paper and pencils and maybe a calculator. But obviously that's very silly. We have IT, we have computers because they serve a purpose. The smart thing is that budget cuts or not, to figure out what are your business objectives, what are you striving to do, or even public entities have these mandates, and then what kind of environment can we set up to be the most efficient at accomplishing those. And maybe some organizations have cross-purpose mandates, have a mandate to cut costs, but then they also have a mandate to go to public cloud. Well, those two are at odds, but I see that happen all the time. So again, it's doing the math, doing an analysis, and figuring out how you can improve organizational productivity, security, resiliency, scalability, while minimizing cost in the process, hopefully by taking costs back out of your existing environment. If you're running legacy SAN-based architecture, that should be a no-brainer.
And when you talk about legacy SAN-based architecture, there's a question here. Why do you say that model is broken?
Well, like the tweet by Mustafa Kali I mentioned about the storage design and implementation, being 1,242 pages, just showing how complex it is. But there's lots of other things like shadow IT. I mean, that's a really bizarre concept when you think about it. There's no such thing as shadow legal or shadow human resources. Okay, sometimes you come up against shadow accounting, but then it's known as fraud. And yet shadow IT is everywhere. One of the analysts on my staff used to be a manager in a 700-person infrastructure department for a global IT firm. And one day he gets a call from his SAN vendor saying, "Where do you want the new SAN?" And he said, "What new SAN? I didn't order a new SAN." And after doing some investigating, he learned that the marketing department a few years ago had surreptitiously set up their own tiny IT department that now had grown to 150 people. And, while a particularly egregious example of shadow IT, it's hardly unique. I think almost every large legacy IT department struggles with this phenomenon of the business getting frustrated in their inability to rapidly respond to the request. They take IT matters into their own hands. And so clearly it's another example of the broken IT architecture. The fact that so many organizations have not just one SAN, but multiple SANs and different models of different brands of SANs, and they have to send people to training on all those SANs and certifications and things like carving LUNs and zoning switches and expanding volumes and managing RAID groups. All these tasks add zero value to the company. They've all been automated years ago by hyper-converged infrastructure. So that's why I say the legacy hardware-defined data center model is broken. And the book includes several more examples as well.
Very well said. Very well said. What about the Nutanix test drive? Greg, do you want to talk for a moment about if people go and sign up for the Nutanix test drive, kind of what it is that they receive access to?
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great point we didn't cover. So what this is an online experience that you can go sign up for, and you're going to actually see what it's like to use the Nutanix software. This is running in a public cloud right now. It would be the same experience you get, from an on-prem perspective, but there are different kind of modules within this that'll walk through different uses of the software, different workloads and use cases and capabilities. So you can get a real feel for what it's like to actually use it, see if it really is as easy to use as we say, and also allow you to just get a picture for what kind of efficiencies will you get to experience and what kind of new things can you do. So very easy to do. The guided walkthroughs and a lot of different capabilities are in there, and we're continuing to add to it. So it's always something to kind of go back and check in a month or two, even if you have used it once, because we may have some new capabilities in there. And I know we've been adding, especially with following .next and some of the new capabilities that we've added.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity for anyone out there who wants to, get the full Nutanix experience. You don't have to download it. You don't have to install it. You just gain access to it in your web browser, completely free, and you get access to every single one of the Nutanix software solutions. and there's a lot out there that you can do. So a great resource, great opportunity for anyone who wants to learn. It looks like we're running out of time in today's webinar, but Greg and Steve, I really want to thank you today for your expert presentations. Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having us, David.
And thank you to Nutanix for supporting today's event. Don't forget to check out the resources there in the handouts tab. And before we go, I want to announce the winner of our Tango $300 gift card. That's going to Michael Capola from Arizona. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you to deliver that gift card. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the event today. I hope that you learned a lot and had a lot of fun. I know that I did. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.